Open our Bibles to the book of Genesis chapter 3. Linz Redding was a guy who spent his whole life as an art director. He's an art director for a bunch of major advertising agencies. And after 30 years at the top of his field, he unfortunately got cancer and he passed away at the age of 52. Just before he passed away, though, he wrote a fascinating article, one that kind of blew up the whole creative world. And in this article, he reflected back on his 30 years of experience in his field. The article is very interesting because he talks about how fulfilling work was to him and how absolutely frustrating and depressing it was to him. On the one hand, he expresses how fulfilling it was as a creative person to be paid to create. It's what he wanted to do anyways. He also got to work alongside other very creative minds, very skilled people, and together, he said, he just found a deep sense of fulfillment in playing with ideas and in producing things that were just satisfying to him. But he also laments his working life. He laments how, because of technological advances in the 1990s, the deadlines for creative minds got very small. Basically what happened is because of technology, people could now produce 3 times as much work, but they had to do it in the same amount of time. So deadlines that used to be overnight deadlines that used to be over the weekend deadlines, now became by noon. And he said this absolutely killed the creative process. Here's what he writes. Have you ever tried to have an idea with a gun to your head? And then he writes, this is the daily reality for the creative drone. He talks about watching his colleagues turn to booze and to drugs in order to cope with the anxiety and the stress of their jobs. He talks, about working 7 days a week and how this led to failed marriages and even to a few suicides. He then ends his article on quite a depressing note. He reflects back on his life, and he says, in his opinion, he did not accomplish anything of lasting importance. And so at the very last paragraph, he counsels all those young creative minds who are working late on a Saturday night to get something done for Sunday morning. He says, put your work down, go home, kiss your spouse, and kiss your kids. We all love work, on the one hand, and yet we all kind of find it very frustrating, and we even hate work on the other hand. We love to contribute, don't we? This is the love side. We love to contribute. All of us kind of have an idealistic sense that we want to move forward. We want to achieve new things. We want to refine things that aren't so good. We want to contribute to the world, and we want to make the world a better place. This is the idealism that drives us. But then so often is it not true that idealism can also become cynicism. A cynicism that hates our work. A cynicism that says, well, work is just so frustrating. I mean, the computer crashes. Your boss sidelines you. All this kind of stuff happens. The kids you teach, how do they become such monsters? They're just kids. Right? You get the kitchen clean, you turn around and there's a mountain of laundry waiting for you. It just never ends. And so many of us in our work then come to this place where we just say, is there even any point to it at all? I mean, am I even making any difference with my life at all, despite all the hours that I put in? Well, our passage today is so helpful for us because it saves us from a naive idealism that thinks, if we just work harder, we can make the best life for ourselves and even achieve paradise on earth. It confronts that naive idealism, but it also saves us from a despairing cynicism, a depressing cynicism that just wants to give up. So I want to talk about this subject of work today, and I'm going to develop it really in 3 parts. We'll talk first of all about why we love to work, why you love to work. Then we'll talk about why you hate to work, and then we'll talk about why your work is not in vain. Quick little note though, when I use the word work, I am not just referring to what you get paid to do. I want us to have a broader concept of work. It is what you get paid to do. But work, biblically speaking, we could just say it's anything that's not leisure, rest, or Sabbath. It's all that other stuff. It's all the activity. It could be, doing your own finances at home. It could be mowing the lawn. It could be all kinds of things. Whatever is work in the broadest sense of that word. So it's what you get paid to do, and it's a lot of what you don't get paid to, but you probably wish you do. So let's begin then by talking about why you love to work. If we're going to understand our passage here in Genesis 3, we actually need to back up for a little bit. We need to back up and go to Genesis chapters 1 and 2. And we need to do this because, contrary to what most people think, contrary to what you might think, listen carefully, work is not a punishment that God invented to punish Adam and Eve for their sin. That's not what it is. What I want you to see in Genesis 1 and 2 is that work does not get introduced into the world in Genesis 3 after sin comes into the world. That's not when work gets introduced in the Bible. To the contrary, to our surprise, to our shock, this whole subject of work gets introduced right when the Bible begins. It gets introduced in Genesis 1:1. It continues right through Genesis 1 and 2. And listen, it's God who is working. What I want to show you, and it's not overstating the point at all. This is not preacher hyperbole, that all of Genesis 1 is about work. That's how important this subject is. That's how much emphasis the Bible places on it. As soon as the Bible begins, it begins by talking about work. God works to create a universe. Then the rest of Genesis 1 is describing how the earth is lifeless and covered in water, and God works to form it and to shape it and to make it a place that is habitable for the human beings that He is going to create later in Genesis 1. Then look with me at Genesis 2 and verse 1. At the end of all of chapter 1, this is how it concludes. Genesis 2:1, thus the heavens and the earth were finished and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished His what? His work that He had done. And He rested on the seventh day from all His work that He had done. So this ought to just begin to reshape us right away when we're talking about work, to recognize that it's God who works. But we actually need to go even further. It's not just that God works. Genesis 1 also shows us that God delights to work. That God finds great joy in work. At the end of each work day in Genesis 1, God, as it were, steps back, kind of assesses what He's accomplished in that day, looks over all the work that He's done on His earth project that He's been working on, assesses it, and then says, that's good. That's good. I like that. I like what I've accomplished today. That is good. Then you get to Genesis chapter 2, and God, like a potter or like a sculptor, fashions a man out of the earth. Then, like a gardener or a botanist, he works at planting a garden. He's getting his hands dirty all the time. He's planting a garden for the man to live in. And then perhaps, ladies, you might like this, is the crowning work that he does, the last thing that he is working at. He creates, like an artist, a woman. And clearly it was a great work of art. Clearly she was everything that was awesome, for when she shows up before Adam, Adam breaks out into poetry. He's like, wow, good job, God. That's what he's saying. So just pause. Let's pause for a moment. Let this sink in. In the words of one author, God is not a do-nothing deity. He's not a do-nothing deity. Work is not beneath God. That's how the old Greek gods were. You know, if you ever read Greek mythology, why did the Greek gods create human beings? To do the work for them, because they didn't want to work. That's not God. Work is not beneath the God of the Bible, and work is not an afterthought that comes as a punishment into the world in Genesis chapter 3. Oh no, we read that God works and God delights in His work. So a Christian understanding of work then begins with the inherent goodness of work. We could just put it this way, that work is a good thing because God works. Work is a good thing because God works. Now, the next thing we need to say, and it explains why we find part of our work so fulfilling, why we do love to work, is this: that we love to work because our working Creator made us like Himself. That's the answer. Why do you find work fulfilling? Why do you enjoy doing certain activity? It's because you, Genesis 1 says, were created to be like your Maker. You were created in your Maker's image. Therefore, you are like Him. You are hardwired to be like your Creator. And what that means, in part, not in whole, but in part, is that you as a human being were made to work. Made to work. Now, let me show you this in Genesis chapter 2. Turn with me to Genesis 2:15. This is also in your worship folder. Genesis 2:15, we read that Yahweh God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to what? To work or to cultivate it and to keep it. To work it and to keep it. Now, answer me this question, trick question. Ready for it? Did God assign work to human beings before human beings fell into sin or after they fell into sin? All right, that was not a trick question at all. I just like to, keep you on your toes. It's so clear. What chapter are we in right now? We're in Genesis 2. We haven't got to chapter 3 yet. And here God is creating Adam and Eve, and He is giving them work to do. So this may come as a shock to you, but the original paradise in Eden was not a place where Adam and Eve lounged around all day and, peeled grapes and just ate them all day. That's not what was going on. Maybe that's what they did on their breaks. I don't know. But just as God in Genesis 1 took an uninhabitable planet and fashioned it and formed it so it would be habitable for human beings, so also in Genesis 2, God creates the man and the woman, puts them in a garden, and this garden must be worked at, it must be cultivated, and it must be kept. And then God commanded them to be fruitful and to multiply and to fill the whole earth. So here's the image then. The image is that Adam and Eve would have tons of kids. These kids, as image bearers of God, would also work. They would extend the borders of the garden till eventually the whole earth was covered with a giant garden sanctuary where God dwells with His people. Now this is so fascinating because God did not give Adam and Eve a fully developed world in which to live. You think about this. They didn't walk into the garden and there was a shovel sitting there just waiting for Adam to use it. And a hoe beside that. God did not create a world in which cities were pre-made and already built so that when they had lots of descendants and filled the earth, they would all have places to live with cars already in their driveways, with shovels to use and all that kind of thing. No. Even in the unfallen state of the earth, God left it undeveloped. And He wanted it developed. God created the world so that human beings would have to dig into the earth to pull forth the metals, to melt those metals down to create something like a shovel. Human beings would then have to take all those metals, form all these tools so that they could then make things like chairs and tables, make things like bridges, houses, skyscrapers, and airplanes. So, since God created us in His image, part of what it means to be a human being, part of your nature, part of what you're hardwired to do, is to work. Somehow in our culture today, our culture really alone, Western first world culture, we have this dream. And this is the dream that it's in all the advertising, it's on every lotto commercial, it's always before us. We've been dreaming it since the day we were practically born. We've been fed this dream, and the dream is this: work as much as you can, as fast as you can, to get enough money so that you can quit working and do nothing. That's the dream of Western culture. Have you ever tried to do nothing? I mean, it's great fun, actually. For about an hour. And then you're like, oh man, that's boring. I gotta do something. So maybe even you begin leisure. You begin like reading a book. You go and sit on a beach or something like that. And that is really great fun. For like a day. Like 2 days. Maybe 2 weeks if you're in Hawaii or something like that. But then a restlessness comes over you. You start to feel a lack of purpose in your life. You start to get bored. and you start to lack direction, and you begin to feel like, what am I even doing? And a kind of a dark cloud settles over you, and you're like, I need to do something of some meaning or something with my life. I can't just do nothing all the time, and this thing begins to settle over you. You see, what's happening there is you're losing part of your humanity. You were created to do things. You were created for activity. So if you just sit on a beach all the time, your humanity will shrivel up and die. This was really wonderfully and powerfully pictured in that little animated film called WALL-E. Came out a little while ago, a great little cute film. In the story, it takes place far in the future, and there's a little robot named WALL-E. And WALL-E's job is to clean up planet Earth. He's a trash collector and compactor and all this kind of stuff. And all the human beings have evacuated the planet, and they all live on these really high-tech spaceships, and they're waiting until the robots on Earth have kind of cleaned up the planet from all the trash we left behind until they can finally come back. The humans, though, on this really high-tech spaceship are served day and night, waited on hand and foot by robots. And so they do absolutely nothing. And so it's really humorous and totally repulsive as the film moves along and you see these human beings who all day long, they just do nothing. And so they're pictured really like giant, huge, overweight babies. They got like short little stubby arms. They haven't used their muscles in so long. They're totally atrophied. And so all the human beings float around, cruise around on these reclining giant lazy boys, for lack of a better word. They never get off them. They can't walk anymore. They just consume tons of calories, and they watch video screens all the time. So the creators of WALL-E are showing us all kinds of things. But one of the things they're showing us is what it means to be human. They're showing us that this dream of doing nothing, of being a couch potato, is actually unfulfilling and ultimately dehumanizing. And I think we all know this. I think you know this. You want your life to make a difference. You want to do something that lasts. You want to find fulfillment working on something that you love. And each of us knows, even in just the smallest way, we all know the satisfaction of a job well done. We all know the joy of accomplishment. You know the joy of work when for years you've practiced scales on your particular instrument and you've been coming up to the pinnacle now of your musical career and you've been working so hard on a song for so long, and then one day it all comes together and your heart just soars with the beauty of music. You know this joy of work when you've been working so hard on a sale for months and months, and then it finally comes together and you're high-fiving all your colleagues. I mean, we all know this kind of joy. Maybe you're in IT and you've been working on this computer system for a really long time, and finally, if everything's done, you push the start button, and the whole thing works perfectly. You know, that's that satisfaction that you have. Or there's just that joy of work that you have when you finish mowing your lawn, finish weeding your garden, you sit back with a tall glass of lemonade, and you just sit there and breathe in the smell of fresh cut grass. Isn't that a good smell? Ladies, you always get these perfumes. They're all kind of peachy smelling and everything. I'm telling you, if you really want a guy, get a perfume that smells like fresh cut. I can't get it out. Fresh cut grass. I just came up with that. If anyone does that, I got the patent on it. I just made that up right now. Eau de grass or something. Something along those lines. We all know this joy of work, the joy of a job well done. And see, let's make this all practical now, bring it together on this first point. This is what saves you from becoming a cynic about your work. Because, you know, we're going to talk in a second about why work is frustrating, but right now we're saying about why we love to work. And what we're saying here is that it's a key part of what it means to be human. That's why you love it. You are made in the image of your Creator, and your Creator is a working God. We were all created to work. Now, I might add this, even in retirement. Now, I don't necessarily mean you have to get paid for it. I don't mean necessarily that you have to work in the sense of you worked 60 hours like back in the day when you had full health. Obviously, health has an implication on it. Obviously, old age has an implication on it. But J.I. Packer has written a wonderful little book I would commend to all of you who are retired. J.I. Packer is now about 82 or 83. He lived a few blocks from me, actually, in Vancouver, so I always got to see him. And he's definitely getting to be a very old man now. He's quite hunched over, but he's got all of his mind, thankfully. Thank the Lord. And he's written a wonderful short little book called Finishing Our Course with Joy. And it's a reflection on finding purpose and meaning in our aging. And in that book, he challenges this idea of retirement as doing nothing. And he says to those who are retired, you still have meaning. You still have purpose. There's still things you can do to contribute to society and to glorify God, even as you begin to age. I commend that book to you if you are retired. But that's the first point then. We love to work because God works and because we were created in his image. It's time to move on. Even as I'm talking, probably part of you, or maybe all of you, is saying, all this talk about loving work, you clearly have not worked my job. So let's come in the second place now to talking about why you hate to work. Now we're in Genesis chapter 3. Let's look at the text again, Genesis 3, 17 to 19. And to Adam, God said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread. Now, notice something. Adam is not the one who gets cursed. Notice that? What is it that gets cursed? The ground gets cursed. This is just another example of God's mercy and grace. Someone else is going to bear the curse. We're going to talk about that later on. Notice also that the curse is not to make Adam work as if he was sitting around the garden doing absolutely nothing. And now God's like, hey, Adam, because you were such an idiot about that whole tree thing, now you've got to work. That's not what's going on. He always worked, but now work will be difficult. I put it this way. Work itself is not the curse. The curse is that work will be difficult. Work itself is not the curse. The curse is that work will be difficult. It's the pain of work. Notice that word pain in there, the painful toil. That's why we hate to work. The ground was always going to produce food. But now there's going to be thorns and there's going to be thistles. Adam is going to have to sweat a great deal to bring forth his food. He was always working, but now his work will become painful. Isn't this exactly what we all experience? Let's kind of go through life together. You know, when you're young and you're getting your first job, you're full of idealism. You're going to change the world, got all these dreams, all these aspirations, but then you quickly discover how hard work actually is. You know, so a young lawyer wants to go into the profession because wants to seek justice and bring good justice to the world, and then, man, that profession is filled with bureaucracy. Man, there's so many difficult paper pushing, and how much am I even making a difference? This is what I hear from young lawyers. A young teacher finds great joy in helping children, but again, man, those kids can make it difficult to teach them. Young parents know about the work of raising children, and so often young parents have this idealistic view, you know, I'm not going to raise my kids like my parents raised me. Things are going to be different in this generation. And then one day you suddenly find yourself yelling at one of your kids like you said you'd never do, like your parents did, while the phone rings and it's the principal on the other end saying your kid is the one causing all the problems in the school. You know, that's what they say. You become a parent, and the first thing you do is you ask forgiveness for all the judging that you did of all the other parents. And then, of course, we could go on. There's the boss that's unfair. There's all the colleagues that gossip and slander. It's the other people who undercut you. It's the company that gets downsized or a hostile takeover or those kind of things. It's the computer that crashes and so on and so on and so on. Work is cursed to be difficult, and we start learning it right out of the gate. Then we get a little older. Our idealism takes another hit. You know, you hit midlife and you kind of wake up one day and you realize so many of your youthful dreams and all those things that you set out to do, they've not been realized, and they probably will never be realized. A good example of this comes from Peter Schaeffer's play entitled Amadeus. It's in it a man named Antonio Salieri. He's a composer, and his job is to compose music for the Habsburg Emperor. One day in the play, he meets Mozart, and he hears Mozart's music, and he suddenly realizes in that moment the beauty, in Mozart's music, the beauty he's always aspired to. And simultaneously, he realizes he will never achieve that level of beauty. He just doesn't have what Mozart has. And isn't that so much of our work? We have dreams and ideals, but so many of them are frustrated by our own limitations, by other people boxing us in, by circumstances that come along so that we do not achieve all the things that we dream about. Work is cursed to be difficult. And then you come into old age and you look back at your life and you begin to realize also that so many of the things that you devoted all those hours to, you think, was that even worth it, all those hours I put into that? Did that even make any difference at all? Leonard Woolf is the husband of the author, the famous author Virginia Woolf. He was also an author. He was a political theorist. He was a publisher. He was a civil servant. And at the end of his life, he gives an assessment of his work. This is what he writes. I see clearly that I have achieved practically nothing. The world today and the history of the human anthill during the past 57 years would be exactly the same as if I had played ping pong instead of sitting on committees and writing books and memoranda. I have therefore a rather shameful and embarrassing confession that I must have in a long life ground through between 150,000 and 200,000 hours of perfectly useless work. I don't think that has to be our full assessment, but so many people get there. And then just to make even matters worse, once you get into old age, eventually to top it all off, our passage says, for all your achievements, you're going to die. Verse 19, look at it with me. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. A couple of decades ago, Irma Bombeck wrote really humorous columns. This is when most women stayed at home working. In one of her columns, she asked this question. She said, what is the greatest enemy of every housewife? And her answer was, dirt. She said, it's what makes your life miserable. She said, there's dirt on the dishes, there's dirt in the diaper, there's dirt on the rug, there's dirt everywhere. You spend all your time fighting against dirt. And then she asked, and what do you get for all your years of trouble? 6 feet of dirt. Oh, the tragic irony of Genesis 3. Adam and Eve thought if they disobeyed God, they would become like God. They'd become gods themselves. And God's curse on work is meant to drive home to them one great point, and to drive home to us one great point, and it is this: you are not gods. And every single day of your life, this is driven home to you. Every time you try to do something. I try to commute in from the outside of Victoria to the inside of Victoria. And every day it's driven home to me, I am not a god. Because I cannot get around or over or under or between all of these cars. Every day, with every frustration you encounter, you learn that you are not all wise, you are not all competent, you are not the all supreme being. Every single day that is driven home to us. And then, no matter how great your achievements are in this life, you might receive every award there possibly is. You might be one of those very few people who actually accomplishes all of your dreams. And then one day, death takes it from us all. And we end up with nothing. Now, this sounds very depressing. And it is, in a sense. But just reflect with me for a minute. Is this not so realistic? We already talked about how this view of work can save us from cynicism. But don't you see what we just did right now saves you from a naive idealism? The reason why so many people get cynical about work and give up on life is because they had very high ideals. Those ideals got smashed, and they now just are totally depressed because they couldn't achieve those. But here's the thing, like in all of life, your expectations, what you expect out of something, is going to determine your response to it. If you expect that you're going to change the whole world and then you don't, you will end up depressed. You will end up cynical. But is this not far more realistic? Expectations are everything. And listen, we're now living in a generation we're raising kids on slogans like this. You can achieve anything you set your mind to. Nothing is impossible. You can be anything you want. Now, don't hear me wrong. We absolutely need to inspire our kids to dream and to try and achieve. We need to say words like, you need to practice hard, you need to work hard, and you may just achieve more than you ever imagined. We need to push them that way and inspire them. And I think that's what those quotes are meant to do. But are those quotes not so high that none of them will be realized? I mean, really, nothing is impossible? What? Think about that for a minute. I hate to break it to you, some of your parents, your son who's got the genetics is going to grow up to be like 5'6". He's never going to play in National Football League, never going to play in National Basketball League. I hate to break it to you. It's just not, it's not going to happen. Oh, lots of things are impossible, actually. A whole lot of things are impossible. It doesn't mean you don't inspire kids and all this kind of stuff, but we got this kind of what they call the millennial generation being raised right now, and sometimes I see it with my kids, and they're going on sports days and stuff, and nobody wins the race. They finish, and they're just all winners. And there are no losers. And I kind of, first of all, I see the deflation. I see the lack of desire to even try now, because what's the point in really trying hard if there's really not going to be any reward for it? We're just all winners and there's no losers. But then I get really worried, because then what happens when you get your first job? Good luck with that when you show up and your boss is there. Let me put it this way. Your boss isn't going to give you a trophy just for showing up. He's not going to give you a ribbon that says, you are great. You know, just because you showed up to work today, I'm so impressed. There are winners and there are losers, and you're going to find out very fast what happens if you decide, well, I'm just going to be the glory of me, and I'm going to play video games for a while today during my work hours, and we'll see what happens. You'll find out. So in other words, that naive idealism is going to come crashing down, and then you're going to become a total cynic, and you're going to give up on life. You're not going to want to work. You won't be motivated to work hard. You won't have any ambition at all. But this biblical view of work gives us realistic expectations. It says, don't be cynical about your work, on the one hand, because work is good. You were created to work. You can achieve. You should have ambition. You can make a difference in the world. That's what we just finished talking about. But on the other hand, it says, don't be naively optimistic. Work is under a curse. Things do not work as they're supposed to. Expect complications. Expect trials. Expect frustrations. Expect things to be difficult. If you have that expectation, then guess what that will do for other people you work with? It'll make you way more gracious with them. If you think they should be perfect, they're always going to fail you. You're going to come down too hard on them as a boss, or as a fellow employee, you're going to crush them to get ahead of them. But if you expect work to be difficult, you're going to be gracious when they make mistakes. You're going to come alongside, try to make them better, and you're always going to be in this process of moving forward. So what I'm showing you here is that this view of work we're talking about saves you from naive idealism and from depressing cynicism. It's realism. I want to finish with one last thing, though. In the final place, let's talk about why your work is not in vain. Why your work's not in vain. You see, the message of the Bible, the message of what this text is getting at, is that God, in His grace and in His mercy, is working to renew this broken world. What we see through the Bible is that God is working out a way to restore things back to the way that they were, but actually to make them a whole lot better. I'll put it in a sentence, and then we'll just develop it quickly. Through Jesus Christ, God is working to reverse the curse. Through Jesus Christ, God is working to reverse the curse. Sin brought all kinds of things with it, didn't it? Sin brought the curse of the thorns. It brought the curse of sweat, the curse of sorrow and pain, and of course the curse of death. But Jesus came to reverse the curse. He took that curse upon Himself so that it could be reversed. Did sin bring thorns to us? Then one day Jesus had a crown of thorns pressed into His head. Did sin make us sweat? Jesus sweat great drops of blood as He went to Calvary to bear the curse for us. Do we know sorrow because of pain and because of death? Jesus was a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. Did sin bring death? Then Hebrews 2 says Jesus tasted death for everyone. And Paul says, as in Adam all die, so in Christ all will be made alive. Jesus frees us from the curse by taking the curse on himself. For Paul writes in Galatians 3:13 that Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law. How did he do that? By becoming a curse for us. On the cross, he took our sin and the curse of our sins upon himself so that we don't have to bear it. Then he rose from the dead, and in the resurrection, in his resurrection body, there we see the great evidence that God is renewing the world. Jesus' resurrection body is a preview of what is to come, for he still had a body, but it was a transformed body. It was a greater body than he had before. And that is a preview of what God is going to do to the whole world and to the whole universe. There's a future coming when God will bring us to a renewed earth. All those who love him, all who've placed their faith in him, will come and dwell on a new earth where God's original plan will come to pass, where the glory of the Lord will cover the earth as the waters cover the sea, where people will dwell on the earth, God's people, and God will dwell in their midst. Eden will be restored. And the great hope of all this for our work is that in some sense that we don't fully understand, our work is going to last. There's so many texts on this. Our work will go into the fire. Some of it will be burned up. Some of it is going to last. We don't fully know what that means. But we see somehow when Paul is speaking about Jesus' resurrection, he says these words, "My beloved brothers, be steadfast and immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord." The work of the Lord, that can be all kinds of things. That's not just what I'm doing right now. Some people think that's what pastors and missionaries do. No. As Paul writes elsewhere, whatever you do, do it with all your might as what? Unto the Lord. So you can drink orange juice to the glory of God. You got to ask yourself, how do I do my job to the glory of God? How do I do my work in my life unto the Lord? And then Paul writes this, listen to these words. Do all this, abound in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. And it's not in vain because in some way it lasts. To borrow a line from a famous movie, what we do in life echoes in eternity. When J.R.R. Tolkien was writing his famous book, The Lord of the Rings, World War II began, and he got really sidetracked as he was trying to write it. He had all kinds of other duties, and the great problem with Tolkien was that he was a perfectionist. And so right in the middle of writing this huge, epic work, which has now become very famous worldwide, he wrote a little short story. This little short story was entitled Leaf by Niggle. And the story is about a painter named Niggle. The word niggle in the dictionary definition means to work in a fiddling or ineffective way, to spend time unnecessarily on petty details. Tolkien was writing himself into a story. Tolkien was Niggle. Niggle in the story knew that one day he would have to take the long journey of death. But before he did that, he had this vision for his life's work. As a painter, he greatly desired to paint one picture. And in this picture, it began in his mind's eye with just a leaf, and that leaf became part of a tree. And the tree behind the tree then became this, quote, "A country began to open out. And there were glimpses of a forest marching over the land and mountains tipped with snow." And so he laid out this giant canvas, and he began to work on his life's work, this great painting. He did a bit here, he did a bit there, but he never got much done because of two major reasons. The first reason was that he spent a tremendous amount of time just on a single leaf. He just had to get the shading just right on it. The drops of dew had to be just right on it. And the other reason was that his neighbor kept needing him all the time, and so he'd have to go help his neighbor out, and it would pull him away from his work. One day he gets sick, and he knows he's going to die, and so he quickly tries to work on his unfinished picture, but the train of death arrives, and he has to abandon his life's work. He weeps, and he says, "It's not even finished." Sometime after his death, the new owners move into the house, and they find this giant canvas, and they open it up, and there on the canvas is just one single leaf. It's the most beautiful leaf they've ever seen, but it is only one leaf. And so they take this section of the canvas and they put it in a local museum and they just title it Leaf by Nigel. The story goes on. Nigel travels on the train of death and he begins to get to the outskirts of the heavenly country. And as he begins to get there, something catches his eye. And the train stops and he runs out and we read this. Before him stood the tree, his tree, finished. Its leaves opening, its branches growing and bending in the wind that Nigel had so often felt or guessed, and yet so often failed to catch. He gazed at the tree, and slowly he lifted his arms and opened them wide. It is a gift, he said. So the world had forgotten him. His work was unfinished, but in the new country, in the heavenly country, he found his tree finished. Now, this also comes into the Christian view of work. In this life, we have dreams, we have ideals, we all want to make a difference. But in this sin-cursed world, is it not true that our best efforts often come to a frustrating end? Isn't that what happens? I mean, even the best of us really only get out a single leaf in our lives. That's what we accomplish, a single leaf. We are all, in a sense, Nigel. But Christianity says that this sin-cursed world will not always be the way that it is. Because of Jesus' death, and as we'll see next week, his resurrection, God is in the process of renewing what was lost. God is going to renew this earth. He's going to bring us into the world we've always dreamed of, the world we've always worked for, the one that we have always wanted, a mightily transformed world. And the message of Christianity is that one day Jesus is going to return, and on that day, God will renew all things. And one of the greatest descriptions of that future world is in Revelation 22 and verse 3, and it says this: no longer will there be any curse. Oh, what a day. Can you imagine a day when there will be no more curse, no more death, no more pain, no more sorrow, no more suffering? There will be no more curse. That's why we sing Joy to the World at Christmas time. But you know what? Joy to the World is not actually a Christmas song. It's actually a song about Christ's second coming. Oh yeah, it is. You've sung it forever, your whole life. It's actually a song we should sing in August. Because here's how the line goes: no more let sins and sorrows grow, nor thorns infest the ground. He comes to make his blessings flow. What's the last line? Far as the curse is found. There is a tree. Oh, there is a tree. The world that you dream about, the world you're working so hard to even achieve here on this world, will one day be. To you lawyers, there is a place where justice reigns. To you teachers, there is a place where we will fully know. To you who raise children, there's a place where maturity reaches its fullness. To you engineers, city planners, city workers, and architects, there is a city whose builder is God. To you in the military, this is a good one, there is a place of peace where we will take the metal from our weapons of war and we will beat them into farming tools. To you doctors and nurses, there's a place where there is no more pain. To you counselors, there is a place where there is no more grief that needs to be worked through. To you preachers and students of theology, there is a place where the God whom you've studied about and read about your whole life, you will see face to face. To you musicians and artists, there's a place where everything we see, everything we look at, and every song that we hear will leave us breathless. This is the Christian view of work. So we can live in the tension of loving work and hating work because we know that our labor in the Lord is not in vain. Let's pray. We praise you, O God, that you did not leave this world left to a curse, left under this curse and all the difficulties and the pain that we have in this world, but you sent your Son, Jesus Christ. We praise you, Jesus, that you would come to bear the curse in your body on the tree. We praise you, Father, that you would raise your Son from the dead. He is the first fruits. He is the great preview of what is to come, and how we long for that resurrection body, the body that will work far greater than this body ever has. How we long for that world which will not be under a curse. And we anticipate it with joy. We anticipate it with hope, trusting that it will come, for Christ has been raised from the dead. We pray this in his name. Amen.